Hi, good afternoon or good morning if you're on the West Coast. Welcome to the Social Media Crash Course Session 3. We will go ahead and jump in and get started. So today our speaker is going to be Alex Bowman, who's our Director of Customer Experience here at Archive Social. You may remember her from back in Session 1 on social media policy. I'm actually down in Iowa, so if we have any law enforcement groups on the webinar today, and if any of your folks are down here, shoot me a message in the chat window. I'd love to say hi to them. It's been an interesting conference. It's essentially a collection of communication directors from the law enforcement space around the country. So just quick housekeeping. So as usual, all attendees are on mute. Last week it was great. We had a number of questions throughout the session. So as a reminder, you can use the question tab on the right to enter your questions, and you can either send to all or send privately, which just goes to the moderator, and either I'll respond to them in the chat window or Alex will respond to them verbally. There'll be a Q&A time at the end, and as usual, the webinar is recorded, and you will receive an email afterwards with resources and a copy of the webinar. So with that, let me hand it over to Alex.
Thanks, Robert. Today we're going to be discussing the role of social media in crisis situations. We'll cover what you need to do before, during, and after crisis to maximize this valuable communication resource. And we'll hear from a few of your peers who have experienced crisis firsthand, including Christy Wyatt, who managed communications during the 2015 floods in San Marcos, Texas. We'll also hear from Bronley Mishler, who managed communications during the Oso mudslide in 2014, and from Captain Chris Chung of Mountain View PD, talking about how he handled crises for his department. Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge what's going on in Houston right now. There are a lot of teams that are on the ground responding to one of the biggest natural disasters our country's ever seen. Our thoughts and our hearts are with the people of Houston today and with the thousands of first responders, public officials, volunteers, and everyone who's working 24/7 right now to get people to safety and help them cope with this horrific situation. We're seeing a lot of what we're going to talk about today playing out live in Texas right now and on the news, and I want to let you know up front that we are going to be discussing a little bit of that situation, and our aim is to do so with the utmost respect for the people that are in the middle of it. They're doing an amazing job, and we're thinking about them today. So with that in mind, in our hearts, let's talk about the agenda of today's lesson. What we're going to do is we're going to talk over the role of social media plays in crisis situations. We're going to talk to what you should be doing before, during, and after a crisis in order to get the most from your social media. We're going to look at a couple different case studies, as I mentioned already, from San Marcos, Texas, and Snohomish, Washington, and then we're going to review the best practices for your agency in managing crisis. So why is this important? Again, we don't need to look any further than the headlines that we're seeing this weekend and today. They say everything you need. Right now, technology has evolved to the point where this has become a #1 channel for communication when things are going wrong. So we need to be prepared as communicators. We need to be ready to respond and put our best foot forward to make sure that we're getting the crucial information out to the people that need it most. I want to start with a little bit of background. Crises, they're inevitable. And when we talk about the type of crises that face public agencies, the ones that come to mind first of all are always the natural disasters, criminal activity, and terrorist threats. But the definition that we use really goes beyond that. It's really anything that's going to cause controversy on your social media. It could be caused by something a citizen does. It could be caused by legislation or something that a public official does. It could be a local business. It could be somebody in your organization who's gone rogue, who's caused some real firestorms. It's really anything that causes a communications firestorm that needs to be managed. Regardless of what the source of the crisis is, we've seen that social media has become a critical channel of communication for agencies. While it doesn't completely replace other forms of communication, it does offer clear advantages. It's faster than a press release, it's easier to coordinate than a press conference, and it's something that's accessible from mobile devices, so even when power is down, when people are stranded, you can still get to your phone, you can still get the message out on social media. It also is a very quick way to get information to be amplified. So you're going to reach far more people if you have a response that's online and something someone can get to from their phone in their hand rather than on the news or a newspaper or any of the more traditional methods. We're going to use social media to share information, to request assistance, and quell rumors. And again, I'm going to turn to the situation that is unfolding right now for some examples of this. You know, full respect out there for all the teams in Harris County and Houston in the state of Texas for how they're using social media right now. We can see some examples right on our screen of how they're using Twitter to respond to replies for help. Here's a back and forth exchange from the Houston PD. We're seeing that they're using it for quashing rumors, which always rumors are a problem, but no more so than in crisis situations. People will take the tiniest little bit of misinformation and just spread it like wildfire. And so having the ability to get on social media and immediately quash those rumors is huge, especially when you look at this and you see the kind of how many times it's already been retweeted and shared. That's the amplification I was talking about. We also see the Houston Office of Emergency Management using it to tell people where to look for information. And finally, the city saying, hey, this is what we need right now. Can you send, if you have these skills, please find this person and share them with us. So these are all examples of how it can be used and how it's being used today, right now. Okay, to further illustrate this, I want to play this video from, let's hear from someone who's experienced the power of social media in crisis firsthand. I do want to warn you that Christy is going to be discussing the 2015 floods in San Marcos, Texas. We planned this webinar. Obviously, we weren't anticipating the current situation, and we did debate whether or not we should show this video. However, we're talking about it because this information is so critical, and we decided that it's important to get this out there. But just a heads up, the topic matter in this might be a little sensitive for some, given what's going on. But let's hear how Christy's experience.
San Marcos is very active on social media. We have, over the last 2 years, grown our followers just on Facebook from about 2,500 to over almost 20,000. We've had several instances over the last 2 years where social media has really been a lifeline for our community. It's been the difference between possibly not making it another day or getting the help that they needed. 2015 for us in San Marcos was what I call the year of hell and high water, because literally we had 2 back-to-back massive floods within the span of 6 months. We partnered with the county and opened an emergency operations center because this affected the entire county, and we were sort of the social presence for the entire community, not just our own city. And we gave people up-to-the-minute information on social media from before the storm began to even the recovery phase. We still continue to feed people information about those floods and the resources they can access now, even 2 years later. During that situation, we had an inundation of calls to our 911 center, and we could not answer the phone quick enough. There are people reaching out to us on social media who were literally on the roofs of their houses, who needed to be rescued and they needed help, and they were sending us photos. We were able to hook them up with first responders who could rescue them. After an emergency, you really want to take a look and see what did we do well and what do we need to do better. And that was really critical for us because our flood happened in May, and by October we were dealing with it again. And so we knew that our community is flood prone. We had never seen these historic floods before, but we knew that we had to, 1, prove to the community that we're capable, and 2, to learn the lessons so that we would make the right choices the next time.
Okay, as you can hear from Christy, you know, she experienced this firsthand, and one of the things that we're going to talk about later is how she used that information that they learned during the first incident to help them in the second incident. We're going to talk more about her story later, but before we do, let's walk through all the stages of a crisis to talk about what you should be doing when. First of all, if you're not already on social media, step 1 of your crisis planning is to get on it. It really makes a difference if you've already established your social media presence. While it's really quick and easy to set up a new Twitter account or a Facebook page, The last thing you want to be doing in the middle of a crisis is throwing a brand new communication method at your team. You'll be much more effective if you've already established a presence, a policy, and a voice on social that's known and trusted by the people you're trying to reach. It's the quickest way, as we've said, to reach citizens during and after, but it's most effective if you already have a relationship with your followers. However, that said, we have seen that a lot of agencies discovered that a crisis is a catalyst for growing their engagement. So basically, something will happen and everyone will turn to that agency for information and advice and then stay around after the fact and continue to engage with the agency moving forward. But that can't happen if you're not there. I know personally when I've been in situations with bad weather, the first thing I've done is look for different towns and see what they're telling us to do, and it's always disappointing when there's nothing there, because that's the information that I want most as a citizen. Step 2 is make sure that you have a plan. This is why you guys are all here today. It pays to have a communication plan in place before something happens. You probably already have a disaster preparedness plan for your agency that talks about moving physical resources around, about how where shelters will be, what responders will be. You want to include a social media communication plan in that disaster planning kit so that you know how to react and respond to a crisis online. And that communication plan should cover what to do on social media before, during, and after a crisis, and you should also train your staff on this just like you would train them on everything else. You don't want to pull this out and have it be the first time anyone's seen it when something has already hit. We do have a guide prepared that you're seeing cover up here for creating an effective crisis communication plan, which will have some checklists in there to help you walk through and figure out what you need to include. We'll send that out after the webinar to help you pull your plan together. So what's in a plan like this? It should lay out the roles and responsibilities for both your primary communication teams and your backups. This is particularly important if you're dealing with a physical disaster, which might isolate some people. You don't want to have all the people who are responsible for communicating in one place that may be out of reach. So in planning for these events, make sure you're communicating with partner agencies that might be able to assist you. It's a great time to reach out to your county, to your city, to your state, and figure out who can be your backups in these situations. You also, like we talked about, amplification of your reach. You want to have agencies in line that are ready to retweet, to repost, to share your message and get to a wider audience. So knowing who those people are going to be and making sure that they're trained is an essential part of plan preparing for a crisis. You also want to create a comprehensive list of any existing communication channels that you'll use. That doesn't just include social media, but it should include social media to say which accounts should be primary on this and which should be just sharing the same message. Because the last thing you want is to have your message be changed along the way. You want to have single sources that can be the definitive source and really put out the best information, and have everybody else be backup, kind of retweeting and resharing that information. And then finally, for things that are more predictable, like snowstorms, it helps to go ahead and create stock imagery, post messaging in advance, so that you have it at the ready. I think every experienced social media communicator that I work with has a go-to list of images that they use, of messages that they use. They can just pull up at a moment's notice and get ready to post. One thing that's important to note there, and I saw an example of this today, is that you want to make sure that if you are going to be using posts like that are prepared, that you have text versions available. Be aware that image-only versions, that even as if an image of text, aren't accessible to readers, so citizens that are vision impaired that rely on readers won't be able to get that message. So keep that in mind when you're preparing those posts. Once the crisis is underway, you want to be first to respond, okay? So one of the key things that we're going to talk about and look at in detail when we look at the OSO mud slide and also hear from Captain Chris is that you want to create a hashtag and get your allies, those agencies we talked about a minute ago, to promote its use and to spread and gather information quickly. If you can be the first on the social media scene and say, this is the hashtag we're using, please follow this hashtag, please use it in relevant posts, you're going to be able to organize that stream of information in a way that you wouldn't if without it. And you want to make sure that when you have those pre-drafted messages that we talked about, that you're going to start tailoring them to meet the crisis. Again, being aware that posts with photos of text are not readable by assistive devices. Include text to save lives. I actually took that right from, there's an image that's going out there today from an agency that has text on it, and it was a comment directly to it saying, hey, those of us who don't have good vision can't get this message. You need to include that text as well. And finally, you need to be ready to correct rumors as soon as they happen to prevent them from taking hold. We saw that on that earlier slide with Houston, and I've seen a lot of those rumor slides popping up. Some agencies will create a page on their agency website that's purely for rumor control, where they can collect and direct anybody who is sharing rumors online. It pays to correct it in the medium that it's being spread. So if it's on Twitter, correct it on Twitter. If it's on Facebook, correct it on Facebook. If it's on Instagram, correct it on Instagram. But also have kind of a repository for all of that information. That's definitely can get people, put people in a lot of threatening situations if they're listening to the rumors and not listening to you. So make sure that you're keeping an ear out for the rumors and that you're correcting them. And again, the final bullet point here is be there first. I hear from a lot of agencies, or I see a lot of agencies who think, oh, well, we don't have complete information yet, so we don't want to post anything online until we have it. And that's, honestly, it's a mistake. Here's a great example we saw from Metropolitan Police in Britain when there was the shooting on the London Bridge. They put this out immediately saying, we are aware of reports on social media. We will release facts when we can. Our info must be accurate. # London Bridge. What they're doing here is they're saying, hey, we know this is going on. We don't have any information yet, but we're on top of it, and we will share information as soon as we do. So it lets the population know that your agency is on top of it, and they should come back to you as a trusted source. Even if you don't have the information yet, you will be the source for that information moving forward. And you'll see they established a hashtag, and they were out there right away. And you see how much this got amplified. This got 15,000 retweets and 20,000 likes. And it lets everybody know that the Metropolitan Police are the place to go for this information. For more on that, let's listen to a clip by Captain Chris Young from the Mountain View Police Department. He's going to talk about the importance of being there first, even when you don't have all the information. Let's take a listen.
What I also want to touch on today is, just breaking it down here, is as we get into a crisis, what that looks like. We here at Mountain View like to think about having two different cadences. One is just your normal run-of-the-mill, everyday feel-good stories that we might post, the puppies, the kids, the lemonade stands. But when crisis happens, we switch tones, and we have a very matter-of-fact and more authoritative tone. And so what you definitely want to do is put out holding statements and messaging. And I'll show you a couple examples of what that looks like. But what you want to be careful about is, and I see this a lot online, is some agencies will tend to not want to put stuff out on social and maybe just wait and see if it takes off. Now, there is a certain art form to that, and I actually say that's a good thing because, as we all know, we certainly don't have all of the information as officers are responding to a scene, and it's normally in the first 10 to 15 minutes we're still trying to figure out what's going on. But on the flip side, if you're monitoring your social media channels and you start to see the public and the media starting to talk about that incident, that's the time when you need to jump in, because there's a very critical element at the onset of a crisis, and that's the opportunity to take control of the narrative, get in the driver's seat of information, and to put out these statements. Because if you don't, someone else is going to drive that boat for you, and someone's going to drive that bus for you, and you're going to spend more time, energy, and efforts and resources trying to put down rumors or put down misinformation. So let's see what that looks like. With regard to holding statements, sometimes I've seen agencies put out something like, please stay out of the area due to quote-unquote police activity. Be careful with that, because inevitably someone's already there. They're already tweeting about it from the scene, and they're probably including pictures. So you're going to have to eventually follow up and answer them and say, okay, yes, it's a barricaded subject or it's a traffic accident. Just go ahead and say what it is. The example you see before you here, go over to Google Maps, do a real quick screenshot. Visual photos included in any post on most platforms are going to get you a little bit more engagement, and it's going to be more eye-catching. So just state what you have. People understand that this information might change. I know there's administrators out there who are hesitant and they don't want to put any information out until you have everything. Unfortunately, in this day and age, we don't have that luxury. News breaks on Twitter, and within minutes, you know, and I look down to what happened in San Bernardino, California, right? You had people tweeting from the scene, from within the crime scene, and if you're not quick enough, you really need to be able to address that to help with your crisis comms messaging. Also, what you want to do is, as the incident unfolds, is to have a cadence. Now, there's no set time, but you know, as you get information, obviously every 5, 10, 15 minutes is great. On the long end of the scale, perhaps every 15 to 20 minutes, you want to be present in the social media chatter, because if you're not, others out in social media or the media will start to fill that blank with conjecture. They'll start thinking of different theories of what happened. So there's a lot of different ways that you can say the same thing without you know, repeating yourself over and over. And this example here is a Facebook screenshot of an actual incident, and this is what I'm describing. Is the bottom paragraph is the initial post, and then what you always want to do is get in the habit of updating just one post, editing it, putting a timestamp. And what these timestamps are, it's basically a historical record of what you're doing. And in this case, you know, we want to have these kind of power words and say we're focused on talking to the individual while keeping the community safe. That's the narrative that you would see and the theme that you would see in the majority of the messaging for an incident like this. Because in the end, if we end up unfortunately having to use force, the narrative is there. We've shown that we're trying to do this in a peaceful resolution. So that's very, very important to kind of keep up and going.
Okay, important words there from Captain Chris. It really illustrates what I was talking about being the first on the scene. One of the things that he mentioned in this clip that we didn't talk about was the idea that there are going to be other people there who are tweeting out information. And so since you can't control what they're tweeting out, you want to make sure that you have an authoritative voice that is saying, hey, this is what's really happening. You know, we're going to give you the information that you need, and to keep the situation calm and keep the situation in control. So don't think that you're controlling the message by not participating in the conversation, because you're not. You're just leaving a hole that other people will rush to fill in. Okay, after the crisis is over, once things have died down a little bit, it's really important to use this time to reflect on what you learned from the experience. You probably have some sort of retrospective procedure in place for incidents, again, that the physical response to incidents, and you should also do a retrospective of your communications response, including your social media. You want to take a look at what communication worked and what didn't, and use that information to prepare for the next crisis incident. So you notice that all the activity was out there on Twitter, but nobody was going anywhere near your YouTube account or your Facebook account, then maybe Twitter is like your primary focus. And not to say that you should cut out those other channels, but focus on what's really working and what's getting the information out there the most effectively. And then you want to make sure you're reviewing your crisis communication plan annually. These things do expire. Accounts change, account owners change, staff changes. You want to make sure that that plan is current, the information is there and current, and so that if you're returning to it, it's not you're not going to be locked out of those accounts. You're not going to have a problem getting connected and getting things out. You also want to be able to respond to any public records requests related to how your agency handled the situation. Of course, we all know that everybody's a critic. They'll all think you should be doing something differently. So you want to be able to tell that story and have that narrative, like Captain Chris said, and be able to back up what you did and why. One of the ways you can do this, as you know, or through social media archiving. It saves you from having to do that during the crisis itself. So now I want to take a little deeper look into the story we heard earlier today from San Marcos, Texas, about the floods, and talk about some of the things, how she put some of the things we're talking about into practice during those incidents. So as you know, they had 2 different floods in 2015, first in May and then in October. And as Christy explained earlier, they were using social media to control the messaging and dispel any rumors that were out there. And they used it to communicate with citizens about specific incidents, about people being trapped, people giving information on where they were, and where they needed help. After the storms were over, they used the analytics from their archive and evaluated their response. They were using it to put together a timeline of the disaster and what happened when, who responded when, and also look to see what it was that what information were the citizens seeking. So they looked at their records and said, okay, this is how the kind of information that people were looking for. Did we respond to that or not? Were we able to address their concerns? How can we address them better next time? And so that really helped them understand what people needed to get through these crises and help them plan for when it happened again, unfortunately, in October. And then let's talk about another case study that happened in Snohomish, Washington. If you remember back in 2014, the Oso mudslide, it was a huge disaster. It closed down different roads, and Bronley Michler, who was on the scene then, did something that we talk about today that really was important. She's the first person who set up the incident hashtag 530slide. And you can see right there that on that post is that she wants everyone to use that hashtag and to say, please look to us for official information. We're the only ones who are going to be putting out like the real answer. But it made it easy to search posts and see what other people were saying about the event and help them to squash any rumors that were happening by finding them with that hashtag. And it also helped engage users in conversation and help them answer questions because they could have that hashtag to follow along and see how things were developing. This is a good example of the reach of social media. Just in trying to get somebody to tell a mayor that the liaison was on their way to brief him. They couldn't reach him any other way, and so they put it out on social media and said, hey, help us get this information across. And that reached almost 4,000 people who shared it and got the information to the mayor and let him know that they're going to be contacted. And you can see in the comments there, Cindy Barstow White responded saying, hey, he knows that you're reaching out, and then we thanked him because they didn't have landlines were taken out. This was the only way to do it. They also use social media to set expectations. We're all human. We all have our limits. And in these situations when you're on your computer, on your phone 24/7, you need to take a human break. And so this was one of the ways that they let people know that we're still working on it, we're still paying attention, but we're going to be, this account is going to be signing off for a few hours to get that much needed rest. Here's where you should go for new information. And made sure that handoff was there. And then when you came back online saying, hey, we're back, now we can tweet again, and you can come back and look at us for information. So it's just kind of a great way to do that handoff and make sure that you're telling people what to do and where to look. All right, let's sum up what we've talked about today and some of the best practices for managing your crisis. Again, if you guys have questions, I see a great question has come in. We're going to address that in a minute about editing your original Facebook posts. I think I'm going to cover that in the next slide. So let's first talk about what you should be doing right now after you get off this webinar. You should be thinking about creating your crisis communication plan and establishing an archiving system so you can respond to those record requests and use that information to better prepare yourself for the next one that hits. When you know the crisis is coming, this is obviously can't be used when it's something unexpected, like a shooter or a terrorist incident, but if it's something weather related or something you can see coming, you can get ready by identifying a hashtag from the get-go. And then you can also divide and conquer. So if you need around-the-clock coverage like we saw with the Snohomish disaster, it's critical to make sure you're training additional staff to assist in that social media management. Make sure they know how your voice is on social media and what the messages are that you're trying to get out. Don't leave it up to untrained staff members to just kind of come up with it on their own. Make sure that they're trained in advance and have a plan. When appropriate, create a post and subsequently update that post. The question we got coming in from Melissa Whistle was, you're editing original Facebook post as opposed to creating a new post with updated information. I think that the key here is when it's appropriate. The example that Captain Sung shared was happening in the manner over the course of a few hours, right? So in that case, it makes sense to take one post and update it. That way, if someone comes across that post, they get the whole story spelled out in front of them instead of just getting part of the story. Obviously, in a bigger, longer-lasting disaster like we're seeing right now in Houston, that's just not practical. You're going to need to have new information coming out all of the time. So I think that advice is really applicable when it's a discrete situation that you know is going to play out over a matter of hours, and you want to get people updated, or even it could be a couple days, but something that's just going to be is going to be contained, so you have that story in one place. That's a great way to kind of give that update. Because the other thing that can happen if you post something saying, hey, this is going on right now, and then you abandon it and set up a new post, if someone comes across that first post, they have no way of knowing that is still happening, and that can just cause additional noise and confusion. People write in the comments, is this still going on? What's happening now? And rumors get out of control, and they think you're not listening because you're busy posting on a separate post saying that the situation has been resolved. So use your judgment, but I think when it's a discrete event, it makes sense to update on the original post versus setting up new posts. But obviously, in a larger scale situation, you're going to need to put out new posts. Okay. We also going to go through a couple more tips here, then come up some tips from our users. Please, if you guys have great tips that you want to share with the crowd, please put them in the chat window and we'll share them out here. Another thing is to consider using live video. If you can include video from the scene that really kind of illustrates what's going on, that can be helpful. It also helps if you're doing a press conference to go ahead and don't leave it all up to the press and their editing. Broadcast it yourself on your Facebook Live or your Periscope, so you have the unedited story that's going out there under your control. And most of all, be consistent in your communication throughout the crisis. I talked a lot about consistency in the last session 1 with policy. I'm going to talk about consistency again, using consistent hashtags, using the same accounts or telling people what accounts to go to, and making sure that your response has that cadence that Captain Sung talked about that's appropriate, that makes sure that people are coming to you for the information. We also got a nice best practice come in from Jill Feldman, saying, good practice when a crisis develops to check for any pre-scheduled tweets or posts. Oh, thank you so much for mentioning that, Jill. Those should be deleted immediately. Goes for everyone, not just crisis comms. We have definitely seen agencies who have not been well received because when in the middle of something major going on, a pre-scheduled tweet goes out saying, hey, join us tonight for the Jazz Festival on the Riverwalk, when something that's causing bodily harm to people is happening, is unfolding. And it's great to use those schedulers, but thank you for that tip. I can't believe we left that out of our slides, Jill. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Make sure that you're aware of things that are scheduled and stop them if necessary. Okay. All right, finally, some more best practices in managing crisis. Again, review your social media activity and identify areas to improve, debrief all teams, and update your plan accordingly, and be prepared for record requests that might come. I want to tell you guys, you know that we are an archiving service. We do offer free crisis support when you need it most. Sometimes you don't know these things are going to happen, but please feel free to reach out to us. We offer a program called Crisis Support for Public Agencies that basically gives you a time box archive that captures that flood of information, allowing you that time to take a breath afterwards and analyze it once it passes. So take a look. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need it. Before we get into additional questions and answers, I do want to remind you guys of our next session, and we're going to come back and do some questions and answers, so don't go away. We are going to be skipping next week after the Labor Day holiday, but we'll come back in 2 weeks on September 12th, and a very special guest is going to be speaking that time, our very own CEO, Anil Chawla. He's our founder and CEO. He speaks at a lot of major national events, including GSMCon, 3CMA. In fact, that's where we'll be next week while we won't be here. Tamio, and he's been asked to speak on these topics lots of times, and our section is going to be on avoiding social media lawsuits, because that's what it really gets down to, is you want to make sure your social media program is awesome but isn't causing you any headache. So please come and tune in September 12th to join Anil for that session and how to keep your social media lawsuit free. Now, let's open up the floor to some questions and any other best practices you guys want to put out there. I know that there's been a lot of chatter right now on what's going on the ground. So even if anyone wants to weigh in on some things they've seen that have been very effective, I'd love to hear it. Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you guys for joining us today for this social media session. Robert, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Yeah, Robert. All right. Well, I think Robert is he's down in the rain in Clearwater at NIOA. So I will say thank you guys for being here today. It's been great guest speaking, and please feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional questions, any other best practices you want to share. We will be sending out that crisis communication planning guide to you in the follow-up email. And that's it for today. Thank you.